Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Read, Write, Local, Unbound, the special event that's was started at Avon Lake Public Library, where we had authors come together. But because of the COVID epidemic, we could not have such a similar gathering. So we are now going to have one author at a time every Tuesday night all summer long. We're getting to close to halfway through of our program, and here we are at June 15th, and our guest this week is John Vanek, author of 3 novels, soon to be 4, in the series that starts with Deros, and then goes on to the second book. Correct, is Miracles, and then Absolution. And these are the Father Jake Austin mysteries, which I wonder how autobiographical Father Jake is sometimes, but I know he's not totally like our friend John here, but they all take place in Oberlin, a place near and dear to his heart, and they're great mysteries with a regular cast of characters to beat the band. But I'm not going to give it all away. I want to have John here tell us a little bit about himself, how he got ready, and so take it away, John.
Okay, thanks. First of all, I want to thank the library for inviting me and giving me this opportunity. This is great, and this is also the first time I've had a chance to read anything from the new book, which is entitled Bedeviled, and it will be coming out in mid-September. So this is the test run world premiere of Bedeviled, so I'm looking forward to it too. What I'd like to do is just give you a short background on me if you don't know it, and my writing journey, how I got from being a physician to a published author, and just talk briefly about the 3 main characters in the book and my goals as a writer. And then I'll read a short passage, and then I'd really love to have any questions you might have. So please don't leave me hanging at the end. Have a question for me.
In the meantime, John, I hope you don't mind if I jump in once in a while if I have a question.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, because I might. But go ahead.
My background, well, I can't claim to be an expert at writing in that I don't have an MFA. I consider myself a graduate of the School of Hard Knocks, which involved a lot of rejection and revision of my novels until I finally got published. I was an avid reader in college and before then. And when I went to college, I was pre-med, and so I only got 3 electives at that time. And I used one of them for a creative writing course and was lucky enough to get one of those great professors who was very encouraging and saw something in my work and planted the seed that I could do this. And that seed has germinated for quite a while before I finally got to do it. But it's always been there for me, and I thank him for that. But I went to medical school at that point, and then I was an intern and a resident, and started a practice and had 2 young kids, so there wasn't a whole lot of time for writing. I did try to write a couple of novels back then, and I still have them. They're in my desk, and they'll never see the light of day because they're fairly god-awful. And what I learned is that even though you read a lot and you have the desire to write, it's still a craft, like being a carpenter. You have to learn it. So at that point, as my kids got a bit more independent, I started taking college courses and going to writer's workshop and trying to learn the craft. And the first workshop I went to was actually at Lorraine Community College. And it was a really great course for me. It also included some poetry, which I never really read as a teenager, and I didn't write any poetry, but I fell in love with the poetry in that class. And I think I did because it was the easiest way to get started. I mean, I wanted to write the murder mystery, but a 300-page novel is a little spooky to start. But a 1-page poem you can get away with. And what I found is I'm what's called a narrative poet. I essentially tell very short stories in my poems, and most of them have a beginning and a middle and an end. So I cut my teeth on the poetry, went a couple of years doing that, and my poetry book, Heart Murmurs Poems, came out in 2009 from Bird Dog Press in Ohio. After that, I continued taking courses and went to workshops. And my big break came when I came to the workshop here in St. Petersburg, Florida. It's called Writers in Paradise. And if you are or you know of any serious writers, it's a wonderful conference to attend. It's week-long, it's grueling, but you end up with some great faculty. Dennis Lehane, who wrote Crystal, Shutter Island, Mystic River, Michael Carita, who's been a mentor and a friend, and his movie has just come out. It's Those Who Want Me Dead. It's a wonderful book, by the way. Laura Lippman chose an early draft of my first novel, Deros, as the best at the conference. And that gave me entree into a lot of offices when I started looking for agents and publishers. So that was a really big break for me. What I found, though, was I got a lot of very nice compliments and rejections from the New York agents, and that was about the time that self-publishing was really gaining steam, and I think the publishers were just scared to death to take on any new authors at that point. Excuse me. So I decided to change tactics, and I went to look at smaller independent presses. They accept agents, certainly, but they also will look at your manuscript if you don't have an agent. And there are some fine independent presses out there. Kensington is one, Camel and Crooked Lane, they're both good. I sent Deros out to Coffeetown Press in Seattle, and they gave me a contract for my first 3 books. So that's how I got my start. And then after the first 2 books were out, Thorndike Press, which is a major publisher, bought the rights to the first two books and put out large print hardback library editions. So that's kind of been my trajectory, and I've found that I've got books pretty much across the world now in libraries, which is an amazing thing for a rookie writer, essentially a journeyman working his way through. Thorndike classifies my books as what they call clean reads, which means there's no gratuitous violence, sex, or language in them. And that was intentional. I wanted that. I guess what I learned from my journey most of all was to believe in myself, to believe in the books, and to not give up in the face of adversity, because there's a lot at first. And you don't let the industry wear you down. You just keep going. As I was waiting for the first book to be published, I was working on 2 and 3. So you can't sit on your hands. You got to keep going. I'd like to talk just briefly about my characters. I'm a believer in write what you know. And Father Jake is essentially a 21st century Father Brown with a hint of PBS's Grantchester, if you ever watched that TV show. He's based loosely on 2 priests who were my friends. I worked 17 years at a Catholic hospital, and one of the priests became my drinking buddy, and we were sitting around, he had his collar off, and we were having a beer or 3, and he looked up and he said, "You know, John, I don't know what to do with these feelings I have for this nun." And I went, "What?" I nearly fell off the chair. I was raised Catholic, and like most Catholics, or many Catholics, I had my priest up here on a pedestal, and he showed me his human side, and it made me think about the stereotypes that we use for a lot of people. I mean, you think you know a lawyer or a doctor or a priest because that's their job, and we know nothing about them. And I hate stereotypes, so when I set about writing Father Jake Austin, I wanted him to be a spiritual man, but I wanted him to be very human with the same flaws and struggles we all go through. He's different than Father Brown in that he's a reluctant detective. He really doesn't want to be in the center of things. And he's also different from Father Brown in that he's had a rough life. He's come from a broken family. He was in the Army as a medic in a bloody overseas war. So he's a little bit different character than Father Brown. He's got an edge to him. I didn't want a Jack Ryan type of tough CIA agent kind of character. There's a lot of those out there. and I enjoy reading them, but I wanted a character who would approach problems nonviolently through things he could think of and using the things he had at hand. When I was writing him and getting him up and going, I had a priest friend who just loves mysteries, and so he's become one of my beta readers. He reads early drafts of my work, and he said to me, I really like Father Jake, but you've got him in the wrong order. He should be a chameleon. And as I say, I was raised Catholic, but I'd never heard of the chameleon order. But it's a real Roman Catholic order, like Jesuits or Franciscans. They also take a fourth vow in addition to poverty, chastity, and obedience. They take a vow to help the sick. And my character, Jake, is both a physician and a priest. So I wanted, that was the right order for Father Jake. And the reason I made him both a priest and a physician was, as I was doing research for this, I came across quite a few Protestant ministers who were both priests and physicians. And so I started looking into the Catholic faith, and there are some, not as numerous as they are in the Protestant groups, but there's some. And I wanted to put Jake in a hospital because obviously that's where I'm more comfortable, and I wanted him to spend some of his time in these stories within the hospital. So that's how Father Jake got to be who he is. The second main character in my books is Emily Beale. She is Jake's high school sweetheart, and I torture Jake by putting him in the same town with her. And she's a blind woman, and I had written her, but I was struggling to get the character right. And I was swimming one day when a blind woman came into the pool and sat her seeing eye dog down, folded up her cane, got in the swimming pool and started swimming laps about twice as fast as I could from one end to the other. And when she'd get to the other side, she'd do a flip turn underwater and come back. And she never hit the wall, and she was amazing to watch. So when she got out of the pool, I came over and introduced myself and said, "Can we please talk?" And I explained to her that I was writing this character, Emily, and she's blind. And so this is a friend of my wife's and mine, and she helped me see what it's like to be sightless and how she gets through her day, and helped to make Emily a much more believable character. There's a scene in Miracles of Emily swimming, and I literally lifted that from the day I met our friend. The third main character in the novels, in all the novels, is the sheriff. His name is Tremont Macon, but everybody calls him Tree. He also went to high school with Jake and Emily. He's not based on a real person, although elements of his personality are based on my long-term racquetball partner in Oberlin. So that's where Sheriff Tree comes from. You'll meet Jake and Tree tonight in the reading. I decided that I wanted to set the stories in Ohio, in the Midwest. I chose Oberlin for the first book for a particular reason, which will become obvious if you've read it. But I got tired of reading stories based in New York and LA and Chicago, and I just wanted to give the Midwest their due. So that's how we ended up there. And in the stories, I put Jake working at St. Joseph's Hospital. St. Joseph's is one of the hospitals I worked at for a long time, 17 years. And I resurrected the hospital for the story. Its doors are now closed, but in the stories, you'll hear about the dormitories the interns and residents live in, and that's all true. I mean, that happened not only at St. Joe's, but also at Elyria Memorial. You'll read about the snack shop run by the Society for the Blind, and that's based completely on the snack shop at the University of Rochester, where I went to medical school at Strong Memorial Hospital. I guess as my goals in writing, my goals in writing is basically to be a storyteller. Let me give you what we call the elevator pitches for all all four of my books. An elevator pitch is essentially a two-sentence synopsis that you memorize. And if you happen to be in an elevator with a publisher or an agent, you can pitch your book to them before they get to the next floor. So everybody, I don't have to memorize them anymore, thank God, but let me give you the elevator pitches for the four books and you'll have an idea what the stories are about. Excuse me. Deros, Book 1. Father Jake Austin returns home in search of inner peace after a brutal war, but a series of murders force him to confront his own violent past, regrets over lost love, and his doubts about the priesthood. It's a coming home story. It's not a story about war. It's about a coming home after the war, and it's wrapped around a murder mystery. The second book is Miracles. Father Jake's life is hurled into the vortex of three storms: a dying sister, a bleeding Virgin Mary statue, and a comatose infant in the intensive care unit. What will be left standing after these tempests have passed? The third book in the series is Absolution. Father Jake Austin must decide whether to turn his back on his biological father, the man who deserted him as a child, or to turn the other cheek and save him from a vengeful drug lord, risking his own life and the lives of those he loves. And Bedeviled, the fourth book, which will be out in September. Father Jake Austin investigates a charismatic preacher and the connection between his church and the drug overdose of one teenager, the abduction of another, and the savage beating of a nun. What he uncovers is pure evil at the heart of a human trafficking ring. Murder, mayhem, and malignant ministry that Father Brown couldn't even have imagined a century ago. So those are the elevator pitches for the books. My mysteries are really not about religion or the priesthood at all, though I'm trying for the bigger issues, human frailty and spirituality and life at the crossroads of good and evil in a secular world. I do love it when readers tell me that they were surprised that they learned something about religion or medicine or maybe their own spirituality. That's been one of the big bonuses. It was a surprise to me as I wrote these, but it made me sit back and evaluate my own spirituality, and that was a surprise blessing I was not expecting. Let me go ahead and do a short reading. This is from the fourth book, Bedeviled. This is chapter 1, Tuesday, March 25th, 2003, 3 o'clock p.m. Sheriff Tremont Treemakin eased his cruiser onto Route 58 and began a slow and silent journey north toward town. There was no need for sirens or flashers. The time for action was past. Neither of us spoke. There were no questions to answer, nothing to say. What could you say? Life, as a great thinker once said, is a riddle wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma. Only today it was also shrouded in a body bag. My day had been routine until I received a phone call from a woman in Pennsylvania who told me that her sister, Mildred Rojas, was not returning her telephone calls. Because it's a long drive from Pittsburgh to Mildred's house, she asked me to make sure her sister was okay. Although she was in her 80s and lived 15 miles south of Sacred Heart Catholic Church in Oberlin, Ohio, where I'm acting pastor, Mildred was an active member of my congregation and a regular participant in potluck dinners and bingo. The last time I had seen her at Mass was Ash Wednesday, nearly 3 weeks earlier, and her sister's phone call had set off a jangle of alarm bells in my head. One of my parishioners lived on Mildred's street, so I phoned and requested that he knock on her door. He called back an hour later to say that there was no answer, but the lights were on upstairs and the doors were locked. The alarm bells grew louder. I wanted to do a welfare check on her, but I didn't think I could or should enter her house. With concerns for a person's well-being, the police can legally enter anyone's house. The law is less clear about priests wandering through people's homes uninvited, so I asked my friend, the county sheriff, to accompany me. When we arrived, Tree used his 6'6" frame and 250 pounds of determined muscle to open a window and boost me inside. The living room curtains were drawn, and it was pitch black except for a faint blush of light at the top of the stairs. I called Mildred's name and announced myself, got no reply, then stumbled my way through the darkness, tripping over a hassock, before finally reaching the front door to let Tree into the house. I flipped on the room lights and we searched the downstairs, which was unoccupied and undisturbed. The air in the house hung heavy, and we followed a pungent, sour smell up the stairs. Mildred lay in bed dressed in gray flannel pajamas, her eyes open. She had no pulse or respirations and was cold to the touch. The flies swarming the room and her body made it clear that she had been dead for a while. I recalled the many times that this kind and gentle woman had delivered food and laughter and joy to our church community. The thought of her dying alone filled my eyes with tears. My friend noticed and walked away as I dabbed them dry. Then Tree notified the local police and county coroner. He explained our presence in Mildred's house and told them he saw no evidence of foul play and suspected that she had died of natural causes. From my time as an Army medic and my years working in hospitals, however, I was certain I had never seen a death that looked natural. When the local authorities arrived, Tree and I left. Our journey took us past cornfields stippled with brown stalk remnants of last season's harvest until we turned onto the highway toward home. Although Overland is a smaller city than its eastern neighbor of Cleveland, it feels like a metropolis compared to some of the rural areas to the south and west. The fact that Mildred had been willing to drive all the way to Sacred Heart Church on Sundays to attend Mass and listen to my sermons made me miss her all the more. Tree was all business on the solemn drive home, his head swiveling back and forth as he scanned his county for signs of trouble. He's one of those folks who live the job, never flipping the off switch. I finally broke the silence. Thanks for coming with me, Tree. I was worried about her and I wasn't sure what I might find. No sweat, buddy. I didn't want you busted on a code 12. A what? Breaking and entering. Knowing you, locked doors wouldn't have kept you out. You do have a history of, let's call it, defying convention. Don't tell my bishop. He gets a facial tic every time I walk in his office. By the way, I called your house last weekend to invite you and Sonia to dinner, and she said you were at some big important meeting. Yeah, you can get all meetinged out in this job. He ran one hand over his shiny shaved scalp the way he used to when he had hair. I was a speaker at the National Black Police Association conference in Elyria. Sonia wants me to run for re-election, so I got to keep my constituents and supporters happy. She's my boss. Well, Sonia, the district attorney, the governor, and pretty much everyone else in the county. A smile danced on his lips, then fell away, his face transforming to black granite. Hang on, Jake, I got work to do. The sheriff punched the accelerator, hurling me back against the passenger seat. Telephone calls flew by my window and a mile of asphalt slid beneath us in seconds as the cruiser gained ground on a red truck in the distance. What's going on, Tree? Not sure. The battered F-150 pickup ahead of us was weaving erratically. We closed the gap and the sheriff reached for the siren and lights. But before he could switch them on, the old Ford abruptly slowed, veered off the road, bounced across a shallow ditch, and slammed into the trunk of a giant pine. Tree skidded the cruiser into the berm, brought it to a screeching stop, and we ran to the pickup. Although steam was seeping from the radiator, the damage to the truck's front didn't appear too bad. The airbag hadn't deployed, but the teenager in the seatbelt was unconscious. Tree put a hand on the boy's neck, turned to me and said, "I can barely feel a pulse. Take over, Jake. You're better at this than me. Do what you can while I radio this in." My medical training kicked in and I checked the teen's vital signs. Not only was his pulse weak, but his heart was racing and his respirations were rapid and shallow. No need for CPR yet, but that could change rapidly. He had a knot on his forehead with early bruising and a cut above his right eye from contact with the steering wheel. Although his pupils were of equal size, they were dilated and sluggish. My first thought was that he had been stoned and driving under the influence. I was running through a mental list of other things that might cause these signs and symptoms when I caught the faint scent of alcohol on his breath. But neither booze nor grass accounted for the combination of a fast, thready pulse and dilated pupils, which left a short list of more mind-bending drugs and uglier possible outcomes. "This is bad, Tree," I shouted. We were far out in the country where the road cut through a thick stand of pines, not far from the middle of nowhere. I spotted a soybean field 100 yards down the road, pointed to it, and hollered, "How fast can you get a helicopter here?" I tried, none available. "How far off is EMS?" "ETA 10 minutes, 15 more to Oberlin Hospital." "I don't think he's got that kind of time. The sooner we get him there, the better. Let's grab him and go." The sheriff hesitated a moment, then sprinted over, unlatched the teen's seatbelt, and began to pick him up. "Wait, Tree, I want to immobilize his neck before we move him in case whiplash fractured his spine." I reached around Tree and placed my hands and arms like splints along both sides of the young man's head and neck. "Okay, let's get him out. Easy does it." Tree slowly lifted the teenager from the car as if he were weightless, and we carefully moved him to the back seat of the cruiser. I hopped in, knelt on the floor next to him, and checked his vital signs again, which were unchanged. With his lights flashing and siren wailing, Tree gunned the engine and radioed the emergency room with a description of the boy's condition. Halfway there, the teen stopped breathing and I began mouth to mouth. We wheeled into the Oberlin Community Hospital ER entrance where a doctor and 2 nurses met us. They eased the teen onto a gurney and took over, much to my relief. We had done all we could, and now his life was in their hands, and by the looks of him, in the hands of the Almighty. Tree and I watched in silence as they rolled the youngster into the emergency room. The wind made a mournful noise, like God sighing. Dark storm clouds blanketed the sun, and a lone turkey vulture circled a nearby field. I slumped against the cruiser, feeling every one of my 48 years. "Been a bitch of a day, Jake. I could use a beer or two. You?" I nodded. As a Catholic, I probably shouldn't quote Martin Luther, but he was spot on when he said, "Whoever drinks beer is quick to sleep. Whoever sleeps long does not sin. Whoever does not sin enters heaven." I know the gospel truth when I hear it, Tree. He forced a tired smile and opened the cruiser door. "Hop in, I'm buying." "Give me a second." I called Colleen Brady, the nanny I had hired to care for my nephew when I was not home, and asked if she could stay an hour more. When she agreed, I slapped Tree on the back and said, "Let's get that beer, buddy. Time to drink our way to heaven." And that's the end of chapter 1 in the 4th book, Bedeviled. So, I would be happy to entertain any questions at this point. I hope you have a few.
Oh, I have some questions off the front end, John.
Sure.
First of all, I just noticed that your background photo appears to be a storefront window because I see reflections in it. Is this a bookstore display you took a picture of, and tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, a friend of mine took this. It's the Mind Fair bookstore in Oberlin. That's their front window.
Oh, okay.
They've been very kind keeping my book in stock. So Yeah, I'm using that as the backdrop. I'm going to have to get one that's got the fourth book in it, but
Soon enough.
great.
Another thing I noticed that I think we talked about last week is, I think I mentioned that it's almost historical fiction because the events in this book take place almost 20 years ago. And you had a very good reason for setting it at that time. So please share that.
You're going to make me give away my secret. Okay. I would love to have had Jake young, but because of the way book one is plotted, the way Darrow's is plotted, Jake is a Vietnam veteran. And if I used him in 2020 or thereabouts, that would make him fairly old, and any potential unrequited romance with Emily seemed to be pushing it. And he gets himself into some situations where he has to be physical at times as well. So I wanted him to be a bit younger. So that's why I came down with the year 2002 for the first book. And then we progressed from there in each of the book. A couple of years go by before you get to book 4. Always the same 3 main characters, but different minor players from time to time come in.
All right. Anybody else? Just either raise your hand or unmute yourself and ask away.
Sure, Jim. Oh.
I see somebody here. Jim is asking to unmute.
Hey, Jack. You know, I think it's really interesting the way that you bring the idea of a priest into the story. It gives you the freedom to philosophize about religion and spiritual values, which you couldn't do if your main character didn't have some type of religious background. It's really, really clever.
Thank you. Thank you. Characters are now alive and living in my head, and they're like close friends. So I'll tell Father Jake you said that.
All right.
Yes, Carol?
Yes. We're from Lorain County, of course, and really enjoyed the history of Oberlin and the Underground Railroad and the places that we have all visited. And St. Joseph Hospital was there all the time. So it was really heart-rending to read that part of your book.
One of the nice and interesting things that happened after the first couple of books came out is, excuse me, people would come to town and they would go to the various sites from the book. You know, this is where the murderer lived, and this is the square downtown, and this is Gibson's Bakery, and it kind of became this mini tour, which was kind of fun to hear about.
We enjoyed it. We enjoyed it very much.
Anybody else? Oh, I can't have been that clear.
Okay, back up. We're all anxious to find out in book 4 what happens with Emily and Jake. I know you can't give it away, but
No, I can't. And, you know, much to Jake's surprise when he comes back to town, he had thought that his feelings for Emily were gone after he entered the priesthood. And she was married at that point and hundreds of miles away, and so it wasn't an issue. And then he got assigned back in his hometown, and she was divorced, and there she was. So it puts, it gives Jake a little extra to think about. I have a mentor and a good friend, Sterling Watson, who has helped me learn to write. And he says conflict drives plot. Well, Jake's got plenty of conflict in his life. It keeps things moving along.
I have one other comment.
Sure.
Being Catholic, and that Father Jake is raising his nephew, and my sister brought this point up that St. Joseph was the foster father of Jesus, and Jake is the foster father of his nephew, which was
Yeah.
a really cool point.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. You may read about that in book 4. That does kind of come up. Yeah, I was very worried when I put these books out because I didn't know how Catholics would react to my portrayal of this priest who has feelings for this woman, just as my real friend had. And I watched the friend I had, the priest, struggle with his feelings for this nun. He's a very spiritual man, and he fought all the way through it, but it was painful for him. And I was worried that the Catholics might react badly to that, but honestly, I've been very pleased at the reaction I get. It was a bit of a gamble, but I wanted to do that.
I saw another hand up here. Yes, go ahead.
Well, go ahead, Joan.
Well, Jack, since you're my guru anyway, I found your reading of the 4th book, the beginning chapter, interesting in how you develop it and how you wrote it. You know, the technique of writing it to begin a book. You know, to get the interest of the reader, and just the way you parsed your words into making it attention grabbing, yes, and just developing the ongoing plot, you know, and really just the writer's technique that you're using. And I found that very interesting, very well done, of course, and I learned something from it.
Thank you. It's hard when you start a book because in a series, because you're going to get some readers who pick the book up out of order, and you're going to have other readers who have read the first 3.
Right.
And so you need to give enough background to the new readers who haven't read the earlier works to make them feel comfortable without burdening the people who have read it with too much. And that gets a bit tricky. And
Yeah, I'm sure.
I try to walk that line as best I can. And when you're introducing characters, like this chapter introduces the first 2 main characters, I want to give you a sense of who they are, what they look like, and hence the conversation about Tree giving a speech at the Black Police Academy. I don't want to sit there and say, my black friend Tree. I mean, that's not what you want to do. So we kind of dance this dance. I try to get as many of the senses as I can into every scene. I want to get not only sight, but sound and smell and taste and touch. And I try and draw as many concrete images so that the reader has pictures in their mind. And I've had readers say, it's like watching a movie, and that's really my goal. And I feel thrilled when someone says that to me, because when I write these stories, I see this story as a movie in my head, and I write it down.
It's almost like you're screenwriting in a way. It's almost like you're screenwriting, it seems to me.
In a way, yeah. There are a lot of writers who are plotters. They plot out from A to Z before they, pick up their pen or start typing. That's not who I am. I'm what they call a pantser. I fly by the seat of my pants. I know my 3 main characters. I throw some hurdles in front of them. I know their personalities well enough, and I let them guide me in how they would deal with each new problem, how they would approach it. And so as I write each book, I mean, I'm often surprised at where things go. In the first book, the murderer was not the original murderer, which surprised the daylights out of me. But it became clear as I was writing the book that there was someone else who was doing this. And for me, that's a great part of the fun. It's also a little scary at times. I know the beginning of the book, I know the end of the book, I know these three characters, and then in between, I'm flying by the seat of my pants. So that's what I'm doing with book 5 at the moment, and God help me, I introduced a ghost into St. Joseph's Hospital, and I don't know what to do with this thing.
By the way, John, thank you for talking about what you do with books in a series, that you don't have to read them all in order. As a librarian, sometimes I'm frustrated by that tyrannical desire of people, I need to read them all in order, when I've never done that. Sometimes, like I said, you start in the middle of a series, it's a new book, and if it's that good, I'm going to go back.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that you're doing that for readers who like to read that.
And I think if the writer is conscious of that and paying attention, you can write books. You can give enough background to make it work if you get them out of order. You should be able to do that. I hope I've done that.
You have.
Yeah.
You question, Maureen.
Oh, Jack, I'm assuming you don't do an outline from what you're saying. And also, how long does it take to write a book?
Too damn long. This is 4 books and it's taken me 12 years. It's a labor of love more than anything, I think. I don't really work from an outline at all. Not at all. Yeah, my publisher wants the next one in a year. I'll see what I can do. I got to do with this ghost first, and then we'll see about getting it to the publisher.
Okay. And
I've been pushed by some of my readers to take on some of the heavier issues in Catholicism, and so I'm introducing the concept of a pedophile priest in book 5, and that's very thin ice I'm walking on right now, along with the ghost. So I'm tiptoeing my way through the first third of the book, trying to handle those 2 issues well.
yeah.
It's going to be interesting.
Anybody else?
Well,
Stephen, I see a hand up. Unmute, yes.
Jack, you referred to this a little bit, and certainly as a pantser, and I'm one too, as I write novels. But speak a little bit about how your characters surprise you. That is, you think they're going one way, and then all of a sudden something happens, and they take you in a different direction. And that's, for me, that's part of the fun of writing. But it's also sort of scary because you can get yourself in some difficult situations to try to work out of.
yeah, absolutely. I've had times where I've typed out a chapter and I go back and read it the next day, and my character says to me, you know what, I would never say that, or I would never do that. This is what I would do, and this is what I would say. And it's like, oh, well, yeah, I know you well enough to know that's true, so I rewrite that. And it's for me, as with you, I'm sure it's a wonderful joy. It's like, well, right now I'm reading book 5 and it's not written yet, but I'm reading it as I go. Being surprised along the way, hopefully like everyone else will be. So I don't know. It's a hard experience to explain if you haven't been there, but when your characters live long enough in your head, I dream about them sometimes. It's just weird. They used to call this psychosis because I have voices in my head, but they just call me a writer, and I'm happy to accept that. Well, one last shot. Anybody else?
Any more questions? Mary Jane,
Okay.
you have to unmute yourself there.
Can't hear you.
There
There
I
you
go. Okay. I am a writer, but of very different sorts of things. I'm a researcher, and I write things that are connected to history and also literature and literary theory. And I find myself just trapped in revising. I'll finish something, and I don't have an editor yet who's saying, well, you shouldn't do it this way or that. I'm my own worst editor. So I read something and I think, oh, I should have done it just completely differently. And I sort of start over again. And I think this is a trap that I shall never get out of, which means I am never going to finish this book. Any advice about trusting yourself to be finished, or at least sort of completed?
I don't know that you ever feel completed. I mean, I read these books now and I go, I wish I'd have done this, or I wish I hadn't done that. I don't know that that ever happens, but for me, my book is complete when it's published and I let it go.
Right.
Revision, I used to hate revision when I first started. I'm in a couple of critique groups, and I think I would say up front, if you're a writer, that's very important to get like-minded writers to read your work and tell you where they have a problem with it. And believe me, my critique group is brutally honest. We tell people what we think about their work, but you need to hear that, and then you need to go back and revise. And what I've found after revising way too many times, and I probably revised Darrow's 9 times, and not the entire book, but large sections. It's a lot of work, but I've gotten to the point now where when I sit down and I revise a chapter or a scene and I can see that it's better, that's its own reward for me now. And I find that very positive, and I didn't have that at first. And the other thing I would say besides revision is research. And this may not apply to you, but as a fiction writer, I have to be very careful not to get lost in the weeds of research. If you do too much research too soon, you never get the first draft done. You really need to grit your teeth, put your head down, and get through the first one. Then you can go back and say, well, I need to flesh this out, and I need to learn something about this. And there's a time for research, but you have to not let it get a hold of you too early. And you have to turn that internal, I think we've all got an internal critic. That's when we write, that wants to stop you every 2 lines and say, well, you could say that better. Well, if you listen to that internal critic, you never get the first draft done.
Right. Well, I certainly get lost in the weeds of history because I started out writing something about the 12th and the 13th centuries. And I thought, oh, well, I really need to know more about the Anglo-Saxons. And then, what would really fit in well with this is a little bit on Greek drama. And I've gone back, I've written this book backwards, which is really hysterical because I can't let the history go. Anyway, I need a good reader to tell me enough is enough.
Well, good readers are critical. I've got, our critique group, Jeannie's in the group with me. She writes. And, we'll spend 10 minutes in the morning. Jeannie will say to me, this is what I want to say, but this word isn't right. And we'll sit there and noodle it out. And that's revision.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how 1 or 2 words can make a huge difference in this story. And it's all been a learning process for me and for my wife as well. And it's been a fun learning process.
Right. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, if no one else has anything, I think what I'd like to do is put up a screen that has my contact information and a little bit about each of the books, just the basic plot. And if there's anything there that you want, please take it. If not, feel free to go. Is that all right, Jerry?
Yes, but before we go, just wanted to say once again, thank you, John, and thank you everybody for being here tonight. Like I said, this is a great attendance, and I wanted to let you all know, it's in the chat here. There's a link to our library website of all the upcoming Tuesday night author chats we have. So if you want to attend any of them, it's the same link as tonight, every Tuesday at 7 o'clock. So we hope to see you then if you want to learn more about this. Because what I love about this is it's not just about somebody writing books. It's about people who love reading them, meeting them, and about people who want to write books and stuff, learning from people who do. So thank you for doing what you've done, for fighting the hard battle there, John. and for spreading your experience and wisdom with a lot of us aspiring writers out there. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Let me put up this slide and you're free to go get an adult beverage. Hold on one second.
Okay.
Let's see. Will it let me share is the question. Come on.
You are starting the share.
Is it visible?
A Word document that is mostly visible depending on how you have your screen set up. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay, well, I want to thank the library and I want to thank all of you for coming. It was nice to have an audience and it was wonderful to get a chance to debut the book today. So thanks for listening. I appreciate it.
We look forward to September and a continuation of this, and I look forward to every week coming up. So yeah, thanks for joining us.